Now we're going to move on to the one-person dinghy. And we had 4 tenderers. We went through the same process as we have already described. And Jaime, I guess you're supposed to, do you want to lead this or do you want me to? Yeah, sure.
Thank you. As you can see, we had the evaluation was against the 4 tenders that were shortlisted during the re-evaluation process, which was to go ahead and select equipment with the full option to consider the existing equipment as an option. We have the D0 presented by Devotee Sailing, which is in the top left of the corner. The laser presented by Ilka, which is the top right in the pictures. The Melges 14 presented by Melges Boatworks on the bottom left of the picture. And the RS Sailing with the RS Aero on the bottom right of the pictures. Part of the criteria and part of the invitation to tender was for tenders to present the same hull for both options, men and women, which would serve both events with changes in the rig to accommodate the different events. We have now a video promotional, just to show what was in Valencia and how it looked like. Can you press tab? We're going to try to come back to the video later. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to give my comments about the process of the evaluation trials. And again, thanking all the M&As who sent us sailors, and for the sailors, all the hard work that they participated in. We had a very good weather window for these trials. We were able to sail every day. We had light air and we had some medium air, someplace between 15 gusts to 18, maybe a little higher for a couple of minutes. Nothing that I would call extreme, but good, solid sailing. And, you know, we have to admit, at least in North America, we sail a lot of regattas in those kind of conditions. The pre-planning included reviewing all of the technical documentation that we had received in the phase 1 portion of this reevaluation, and then some further information that we were provided by builders. The manufacturers, builders, were given opportunities to talk to the evaluation panel every day. We had different topics set up and we brought them in to address us. That gave them opportunity to update us on any plans they had, how they viewed their equipment going forward. It also gave us an opportunity to interview them to focus into some of the specific criteria that we were interested in. We also gave the manufacturers an opportunity to coach our sailors on the water, recognizing that many had never even laid eyes on the equipment that we were sailing. And we wanted everyone to have the opportunity to learn what the nuances of each piece of equipment were in a rapid manner. So we had a coach on the water focused on their own piece of equipment, a coach from the manufacturer on the water. At the end of the trials period in Valencia, we also asked manufacturers for final feedback as they were departing, and to find out what lessons learned they might want to give us, or any other information or observations they had to make. After the report was published, World Sailing again reached out to the manufacturers and asked them to submit any comments they had that would give them an opportunity to express their views to everyone who would be reading the report. All the evaluation debriefs after sailing and interactions with the sailors were done in free and open discussion. And then sailors were asked to fill out questionnaires that were pre-populated with questions that directed them towards the evaluation topics that we were interested in getting feedback from. So not only did we allow them open discussion time, we allowed them to have a private conversations, so to speak, with the evaluation panel where they put their thoughts in writing. The evaluation panel themselves debated and deliberated in a free and open environment, sequestered, closed-door meeting where all views were accepted and expressed. We included our coaches commission representative, our representative from the training, what is he called? Well, he has a title, but our emerging nations representative.
World Sailing Delivery,
Right.
Training Delivery Manager, which works with the emerging nations.
Right. So I've gotten ahead, and now they've got the video ready, so I'm going to stop and let them play the video. So that wasn't our windy day, just so that you know. So two members of the evaluation panel are sitting at the table with us besides myself, and I'd like to open the floor to them. Jan?
Yeah, thank you, Lina. I think one thing which is really important is that we got a good range of sailors going from world champion to arriving in the single dinghy classes, but with a strong background. We got a number of days of sailing, and we put the sailors in the situation that they are used to. It was like kind of a normal training with a warm-up, with a going long upwind, long downwind, and then on a race course. Important to say that you saw on the image that they were kind of racing, and the boats were racing on the same area, but it was not a race between the boats, because it's not the purpose of the evaluation to know who is the fastest upwind or downwind. It's really to do the evaluation regarding to the criteria. And luckily, I think we have a range of weather forecasts which cover the key points, like wavy conditions, flat waters, really light winds. We don't have extreme strong winds, but the sailors' feedback were really valuable. And we also saw that as it's like great champion and people used to train, they got a good learning curve because they were almost all coming from the laser backgrounds. So for sure, the boat they know the best was the lasers. But then after only 1 day or 2 days, they were finding solutions on how to handle the other boat as well, because sailors are able to adapt quite quickly. And so the feedback were really being done boat per boat, and then only the small improvement or question were regarding, I'm doing this on this boat, how I can do it tomorrow on that one, and to gather feedback from the coaches. So it was really, as Dina said, a good discussions and long discussion, but needed discussions after the sailing also.
Jorgen?
Two items in addition to what Jans just said. First of all, about the learning curve, I think it's important, both from sailor's side, but also from the panel, that this learning curve was taken into account also with the report that is currently on the table, which means that scores initially given in the week were evaluated throughout the week to come on the Friday with a final outcome that really reflects the point of view from the different stakeholders. Maybe also a word on the selection of the sailors. I think it's important to say that it is on purpose that we chose M&A appointed sailors rather than builder appointed, as this clearly, it doesn't take the favorism for the boat you know the best away, but it certainly reduces the risk, and we were lucky to have a team of very, let's say, critical sailors who were not afraid to give comments no matter what kind of direction. Okay, thanks.
The other part of this I wanted to mention is something that Jorgen and I actually did together. And that is, we took a time every day during our trials to select one piece of equipment and go over all 4 of the boats that they brought to the trials. And by the way, we had 4 boats at the trials from each manufacturer, and I know that's in the paper, but that worked out really well for us. We took those 4 pieces of equipment and looked at them not for class rules compliance, but just from standardization. You know, here you brought this piece of equipment and we've been sailing it for 3 days or, you know, whatever it was. And, you know, yeah, I might have weighed some things that were soaking wet, but I weighed all of them when they were soaking wet and things like that. So we looked at hull weight. We looked at mast weight. We looked at appendages, the centerboards and the rudders, their weights. Not always totally stripped down, but just the same way for each across the set of boats. We looked at construction from the point of view of how do the fittings look after they've been put on the boat and used for a couple of days? You know, do we see things wearing down in just that short a period of time? So we think we did a very good job of looking for standardization without looking at class rules. I don't believe it would be fair to say that we looked at class rules really at all at the trials. That wasn't our point. We were clearly trying to see how the boat sails, how it was going to be used by the sailors, and how it held up during the sailing. So those are our opening statements. And I know that you all have lots of questions, and I'm going to open up the floor to that. I don't know who wants to go first. Marie, you?
Well, I wasn't at the trials, and so I'm reliant on the report, and I thought the report was quite comprehensive, and you know, I feel we've put a process in place to go to sea trial, and we've come up with a report. We've obviously, one of the conclusions was that 2 of those boats would be suitable. When I look through the data overall, I come up with my own impression that the RO0 seemed to come out the best all round for my summation of it, but I noticed that it wasn't really spelled out in the report, and I was wondering if there's a comment on that.
We used a scoring matrix for the report, and at the end of that time, we were very critical of our own matrix, and we looked very hard at what things we were evaluating and how those interacted with each other, and that we didn't double count too many things. If the sailors were counting something, we didn't count it again. However, universality, for instance, covers, the cost of the equipment, the design of the equipment, the quality of the equipment. So you see that go back to that one. Those were our evaluation. Could you go back to that previous one? Those are our groups and subgroups of what our criteria were. And we felt that at the end of the day, our matrix gave us a highest score, a next score, a next score, a next score. It would have been very hard to say that the current equipment wasn't suitable for the event, considering it's provided the event for the last 4 or 5 cycles, right, for 20 years. So we didn't feel that we could make a recommendation that said it wasn't suitable. However, for our evaluation, it was not the highest scoring piece of equipment. And so that's why we did not conclude and recommend only one piece of equipment. There is some confusion in universality, and now we could go to that slide. People have a lot of different definitions of what universality is, but these were for the criteria and for the selection evaluation process. This was our definition. This set of criteria and this explanation was used throughout all of our groups and subgroups, and what focused our conversations with the sailors and our conversations around our debate table to get to our final scoring and technical evaluation. Cost was truly evaluated as a separate entity from technical. You can read the report to get all the details on it, but we did spend a lot of time talking about cost as well. Who's next? Questions? Bill?
Chair, if you would bear with me, I have about 10 questions that I'd like answered. Some may be yes or no, some I would like maybe different answers from the people that were part of the test. And they're not in any particular order, but first, was there a detailed capsize and recovery check of all the boats, or was it just observation as the sailors were sailing?
I believe it was the second day of the trials. We asked everyone to capsize their boats at the end of the day before they went into the dock. We did it then because we wanted to see how they did when they had been sailing all day, and we waited to the end of the day so that they didn't have to be soaking wet. We wanted them to do a full capsize. I didn't want somebody, to sort of not do a full capsize and not get wet.
And if you'll indulge me as we go through these, Was the same person able to capsize the 4 different boats, or did they only capsize one?
Over the course of all the days sailing, I would say that most people had an opportunity to capsize all. Yeah, I think we were careful about who was sailing which boats.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you for the question. Just so that we understand how the process were and how the sailors rotated the use of the boats, we tried to optimize as maximum as possible the time that we had with the same conditions to make sure that all the boats were tested by all the sailors within relatively similar conditions throughout the day. We had the M&A sailors appointed by the M&As, but we also had a group of volunteers, sailors, that the local organizer, Valencia, provided for us. So we were able to have, at every time in the water, in the training area, we had 2 of the fleets training, and then we had volunteers bringing the next fleets over to the sailors for the rotations on the water. That allowed us to check with the 2 fleets at a time, while the volunteers were bringing and sending back the hulls to change the rigs and to bring them back and have the sailors rotating among that period. We also took track of which sailors sailed which boats at which time, and they all had a rotation in the water during every day among the different boats. And then the particulars regarding the capsizing, there were not only just one day everyone asked to capsize their boats, but throughout the days, it was left also to them to want to test it. But the feedback was taken into account both through the medical observer, who took it into account for his report, and also in the section of appeal, and how the sailors would consider that as a factor on liking the boat or not. There were several points regarding the several boats and the ease of recovery for relatively small bodies, big hulls, etc. So those observations were fed throughout the week, regardless of not only the result of that time when we asked them also to capsize.
Did you consider having to take a boat apart after a sailor has been removed from the boat? Is it of their ease or impossibility, or you could or could not?
Taking apart as in destructive test, or?
No. I think I know. So there are 2 boats that have halyards. So removing the sail to make it easier to tow that boat in was considered. It was noted. It was part of appeal and safety. It was not a specific requirement in our evaluation. However, we certainly all noted and discussed the advantages and disadvantages of being able to raise and lower the sails on the water. Is that what you're asking me?
That's exactly what I'm asking on the safety aspect of running regattas. Next question is, when you're discussing with the builders, and you all sat and talked with the builders, did you go through the history of their startups, their problems, what needed to be fixed, what broke?
Thank you. So the discussions with the builders were around several areas that the panel requested them to prepare for, and they were free to speak about whatever they chose to. So they presented the panel with their considerations on what they preferred to discuss around those topics. And then, in addition, they were given the opportunity to have a closing statement where they discussed freely about everything. Some of them, they discussed how they came into producing the boats that they showed at the trials. Some chose to focus on other sections of the evaluation and promote those areas, but it was up to them to what they chose to present and to discuss. Regarding the challenges that they faced when designing, the evaluation not only takes into account what we saw at the sea trials, but also part of the inspections that were conducted during the re-evaluation phase, where we audited the yards of the main manufacturers, and there are some explanations on how the boats came to be what they were provided.
this is specifically to the chair, who I know is involved in naval architecture. What about problems? Your own feelings of the boats, of problems or potential problems? Did you see any?
Well, there are some characteristics of certain pieces of equipment that were noted to be less desirable. The wave day was important for that, for some of that. Even the light air day was important for that. As the sailors, learned to sail the boats, there came times when their feedback told us lots of things about characteristics of the boat, of particular boats. The lack of volume forward on the D0 was noted from day one, that the boat is very nice in flat water. It is designed to cut through waves, so the sailors felt, even in medium air, that they were always wet and that it was always water coming through. It also was very sensitive, obviously, because of that, for body position on the boat. I can tell you from being in the coach boat during the trials that different boats were easier to grab. That's not really a naval architecture thing, but I'm not sure we watched to see how much people had to steer, for instance. That's an indication of boat balance. You could see if somebody was really having to press the boat to bring it up or down, were there big rapid motions and stuff. That's why the panel was on the water. All of us were on the water every day. We certainly saw other struggles for body position, and we mentioned those in the reports. What other naval architecture characteristics are you looking for?
Really just, I know in the past, in considering designs of different boats, you have recognized where there's going to be a problem. I know the NACRA, for instance, and I'm just dealing with your experience. I just wondered if you saw something. We know the lays at the three other boats, if you saw something that may be a future problem.
Go ahead.
One thing to note also is, of course, the evaluation panel noted and asked the sailors to identify those areas that they thought would require further evolution in the boats, or that they thought would be subject to breakage. We also noted the items that we considered needed to evolve or were likely to break. We had sessions following sailing where we went through the boats with the sailors, without the manufacturers, and we discussed the equipment. We discussed what was likely to wear, what was likely to broken. We requested to identify the items that had been broken. And of course, the evaluation panel took into account whether if they were solvable issues or design factors that needed to change, and it took that into account in its evaluation. There were minimum areas that were resolvable at place, and those were not negatively accounted for.
Good. A couple questions regarding, or one question regarding the fairness of your scoring process. And that is from day 1 through to day 4. Did you guys, and this is to the panel, did you formulate opinions, or was your opinions able to be altered as you went forward day to day, as you experienced and saw different things in the boat?
As I mentioned before, the learning curve was not only on the athlete side, also the panel members were discussing on a daily basis what they have seen. And so the scores given at the beginning of the week, they were not fixed till the end. So if a learning experience told us that a score needed to be adjusted based on what we had seen in the meantime, we would do so. So by the end, by Friday, the basic data that ended up in the report are really reflecting the perception of the whole week and not just a fixed point in time.
Thank you for that. But since you went through that scoring process, and every night, as I understand, you listened to the sailors, you listened to the people that were doing the evaluations, was there a polarization in the scores between men versus women?
Thank you. That's a very good question. As explained before, it is true that we have two different events, men and women, and as explained, the criteria set up for the tender process was to have a boat that was suitable for both men and women with changes in the rigs. Therefore, the discussions were combined with the men and female sailors throughout the week. There were areas that were identified to be different from the feedback from the men and the women. However, we also had sessions where the men sailed the women's rig, and of course they all contributed to identify those aspects of the equipment. There is indeed some comments about suitability of some equipment that regards the woman physiques, and some regards the men's physiques, but it was evaluated as a whole, as combined, as suitable for the combined event.
And the physique comments came from the sailors. You know, those are things that evolve over time, what the exact weight ranges end up being, but they were opinions of our sailors. When the men were sailing a woman's boat, we also had a woman sailing the men's boat, knowing that we expected that to be too large a sail area for them, but being on the water, we did have it go both ways.
So if I read that correctly, then a larger, I'm being very careful because my sisters and my wife would be very angry with me, but a larger woman sailing the men's equipment or men sailing the women's equipment gave you a consideration if there was a larger purser or a smaller purser sailing in the same class but in different, so you have a correlation with the weight range.
Yeah, and we were using the changing on the boat also for that purpose, to have feedback on that situation.
With your scoring, with the questions asked, did you ever have a point where you didn't think the comments were valid? That you had to discount, like they were too outside the box one way or the other?
Generally speaking, not. So when we looked at the comments that were received both from panel members and sailors, there were no real outliers, as I can say. So it's not that, let's say, part of the team was on one side and some others were on the other. Obviously, you will get in a scoring matrix a variation of plus minus, let's say, 1 point. But overall, there were no outliers.
And Bill, by that we mean, and I think, you know, there could be varying degrees of likes and dislikes, but there was never somebody or some area that one person claimed to like and everyone else disliked, or vice versa. We didn't ever have that kind of discrepancies in our discussions, our evaluations, or in our scoring, or in our comments that we were being fed back.
If I can take a conclusion from the two comments, is you felt that there wasn't a bias that everything was looked at as a whole without a bias between the sailors or any of the other evaluators.
We did. We talked about that at the end of the evaluation. We felt that the feedback we had received was fair. We asked each other, we looked at each other and said, you know, do you feel like you're being fair and unbiased? We reminded each other often of that. And yes, I think that the M&A sailors came with open minds, or even if they didn't have an open mind, they modified some of their views over the course of the week. Some people showed up and said, oh, this is terrible, and by the end of the week, they're saying, it's not so bad.
I have two other questions, but I would like to leave them until after there was any more questions or comments around the table.
Well said. Does anybody else want to ask us some questions? Barry?
I'm not sure whether this question should be asked now or at the end of our discussion before we go into a vote, but can the one-person evaluation panel advise others on the equipment committee that weren't involved in the evaluation on whether they have a total preference or a preference for one boat against any others? It's a loaded question, and you may want to think about it before you give an answer, and that answer could come after we've heard other questions. Thank you.
I think from a panel's evaluation point of view, that the scores as they are now on the table are actually reflecting the conclusion of the panel. I think it's important to note that the discussions we are having or hearing around the laser and ILCA situation at the moment we were evaluating, they were considered as an equal candidate to everybody else, so it's really taken into account a fair option, and I think that's also the general point of view of the panel, that the scoring is really giving the outcome of the whole process.
Yeah, to answer your question, Barry, I would say the preference according to the criteria, because the word preference can be really, really personal. If there were like one boat being really in front of the others at the end from preference and criteria point of view, I think the panel would have ended up with a single boat recommendation, where now we got two boats suitable on the table with a scoring matrix which show one in front of the others. So if then I'm speaking on my behalf, there were like two boats ahead of the others, but not only one preference at the end of the evaluation.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jürgen. I just thought that the question needed to be answered, and you've given me some answers. Thank you.
So the point that I just want to add here is we did not look at the market situation at all. When we evaluated based on the technical capabilities of the pieces of equipment provided, and we were not distracted by all the other background noise, which certainly if you look at the timing, the trials ended and then there was the announcement from from ILCA that laser performance was being, being terminated. Yes, Barry.
Thank you, Dina. My view is that there was a tender called, the tenders were put in place and accepted, and then you had the evaluation trial, and from that evaluation trial, a report was written. Anything that happened after that report was written or after that evaluation trial was concluded, I don't think should come into the discussion, to be honest with it, with everybody around the table. And so that's why I asked the question, did you have something from the evaluation trials? And that was the reason for the question. Thank you.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Anybody else? Kathy?
I suppose, I think as a committee, you know, what's come out of that, we have 2 boats that are suitable equipment. And I mean, do we feel that one of them is far superior to the other, you know, to warrant a change in that, you know, it will affect M&As all around the world? I mean, is it different enough? Is it going to make a difference to sailing around the world? That my feeling is that it isn't. You know, it's too, like from the comments from the sailors who were involved in the evaluation, certainly in the report, they seemed, there wasn't, you know, they didn't say one boat was absolutely amazing, you know, compared to the others. So I think we need to be very careful that we don't just change equipment just for the sake of changing it, just for something different, but that it is going to make a difference to sailing, you know, for the future of our sport. Thank you.
I'm not at all a sailing specialist, but looking at the numbers I got in the report, I noticed that all boats that are fighting with the laser are made for ideal weight ranges that are heavier. Yeah, both in the men and the women fleet, they all score better for higher weights. Is that a requirement in the tender?
No, and that's the point I was trying to make, is all weight ranges come down as people learn how to sail the boats. We didn't make a technical evaluation and do calculations or try to do any kind of technical. That's an impression from 4 days of sailing. And some of that is valid, whether we think the, you know, these rigs are carbon fiber rigs. They're a little different to tune and to control. We were doing a lot of coaching, especially on the windy days where we needed to go and help people understand how to depower their rigs. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. I felt it was, you know, it's still sort of to be determined what the ideal weight range is. We know where we are with the laser because we've sailed it for such a long period of time.
Yeah, just because I always hear that for the laser radial, already this is made for heavier women, and then I see everything that is tested here is even for even more larger women.
I think if we were to go forward from here with a new piece of equipment, it would behoove us to investigate the rig sizes for both the men and women to make sure that we put that in the right weight range and where they're to serve our sport. I don't think that we could reach that firm a conclusion in the short period and over the range of times that we had. Go ahead.
So one thing, of course, the evaluation panel also noted the suitability of the equipment to serve youth and pathway for the Olympic. And of course, the hulls were identified, regardless of the rig sizes, they were also identified as more suitable or less suitable for other sail sizes with potential to serve those ranges.
And that was going to be my response to Kathy. I think you have to look at the whole range of where this equipment will fit in our development programs as well as the Olympics. You know, this is our universal boat that's supposed to serve as a pathway. And I think one of the interesting things is every one of the modern hulls were lighter. The building and the construction of all three of the modern hulls allowed the hull itself to be lighter, and that has a direct effect on performance. All three were also designed around having multiple rigs. For the existing equipment, that isn't the case. They tried to modify their rig. That was a future development. The others are coming at it, you know, being able to design their boat around that pathway. And so that does give them a little bit of an advantage. Weight we evaluated through our medical commission expert, and had discussions with our emerging nations, our training manager, about what the effect of lighter hulls is and what it means for the pathway. And we did include that in our scoring matrix.
Thank you, if I may, and to add to the reply, in sense of is the equipment too similar to require change? The evaluation panel noted that the equipment is similar enough to continue having the benefits of the current equipment and to serve the potential benefits and to align itself with the benefits that we see in the current equipment, but also different in the aspects that would provide some advantage for a change and some reason for change. So they are indeed similar enough in the positives and different where the evaluation panel notes that some areas are lacking in the current one.
Bill, I want to come back to you. You said you had 2 more questions.
We have 2 boats that have come out of the evaluation process. It's probably significant to note that they're both international classes, that rules have been considered, constitutions, everything. We are not actually going with something brand new. So that is probably the first time since I've been around the table that we are looking at switching, if we do, to an existing international class. That should be noted with what we have here. It's not a new experience. They're there and existing. Regarding the building, and I know that processes and manuals and shop visits, it's secret, but you've been to these places. We know about the existing equipment. With the other candidate that's before us, have you worry or have a comment on the building processes? Can they be moved to another plant and maintain the quality that you've seen? Do you have any reservations about it? Could one of you talk about that?
So this was brought up during the evaluation, and of course we considered which are the current existing manufacturers for all the builders, how the systems in place that they have in order to achieve a standardization among the different builders, also the quality controls that they have at each manufacturing yard and how they spread across the different manufacturers. And the questions were, what happens if one manufacturer goes out of business? Where are you left? Speaking about the recommendation that was made from the evaluation panel, we have to note that currently it is one manufacturer, the RS Aero. They do have, however, the systems in place where the evaluation panel considered that they have, and they presented all the documentation and a system that would allow them to take all that to a different manufacturer facility and have the production set up in the same way elsewhere. In their favor, we have to note that they have quite an updated system in terms of quality control and management that the evaluation panel believed that it will be possible to do so. And of course, with everything going regarding the evaluation of the market situation, they have already plans in place to increase manufacturing sites and have multiple manufacturers. So that was noted.
Their business plan is in existence right now because they're not an Olympic piece of equipment. So from what I understand, they had a business plan in place if they became the Olympic equipment, or they're already going to be doing this and respond to the market as it is now.
Sorry, can you formulate that again?
Well, they are a single manufacturing facility right now for their equipment. That's their current business plan. If they become Olympic, they're going to have more manufacturing places, or they're going to have more manufacturing even if they don't become Olympic.
So what we were presented with and the plans are in response to the requirements from World Sailing to open manufacturing. Regarding what they would do regardless of being selected or not, I believe it will depend on their strategy and it will be based on demand. However, they express that they are capable of increasing production to the numbers that we presented, we believe are required to achieve the numbers to be considered universal and appropriate for the event with the current manufacturer. But they also saw the benefit of increasing production elsewhere. But I cannot speak for their plans.
Do you have any reservations about this?
I don't. I was very impressed with their plans, their production facility. I mean, I think you're still asking me about production and manufacturing, right? Okay. I was very impressed with their quality control program. I was impressed with the fact that the hull for the Arrow is not built in a traditional boat building manufacturing plant. Therefore, they had to develop and produce the instructions down to the wire. Where they're built is a high-tech composite manufacturing facility, not a traditional boat builder. And then I would call RS Sailing a consolidator. So it comes to them, and then they bring all the parts together, and then they ship it out. So all of their manufacturing is subcontracted, and it comes together, and then it goes out. But the plan, the hull building plans, for instance, could easily be transferred to another high-tech manufacturer, composite manufacturer who was familiar with modern technical building that includes carbon fiber and curing in. They have some sustainability things where they reuse their bags, for instance. So, they would have to be at the right facility. But I had no doubt that there were multiple facilities around the world that have the technique. It doesn't take somebody who is too far along in the high-tech composite area.
I will take your first part of that comment about traditional boat builders. I'll take it on the chin for all the rest of us. The last question, and I thank you for bearing with me, but I need to get this out. Does anyone around the table have a problem right now with a single source of equipment, or are all of us satisfied that it could be adjusted and changed if the new equipment was voted on? I mean, we all know the existing problems of our current equipment. So we have to think about, this is a single, can they get to if it's picked to multiple places if it's needed? All of these things should be considered by us as if we are going to vote one way or the other for this. I can't believe everybody's already made up their mind. Somebody must have a question with some of this.
I'm just thinking about what you said, Bill. You could think about this in two ways. You could think about the exact question you said. Are they capable of setting up to multi-builders? And the other way you could look at it is you could look at it relative to the alternative, and you could say, are they capable of doing it better than the alternative, which is obviously at the moment is quite an unknown.
So I think that was my question is, did the evaluation panel come away with the feeling that some of the issues with availability that are current would be resolved with the change?
I think the two options we have currently on the table have, let's say, a different approach in such a way that we have one case where we have multiple manufacturers and where we hear some regions having difficulties of supply. The alternative is at the moment a single manufacturer but has a widespread distribution network, and, bearing my mistake, in over 50 countries, which helps believing that the solution would be partially in there, that going to that option could, to a certain extent, solve the discussions you have in terms of supply. But that's also the reason why they were put forward as two valid options, as Jan mentioned before.
So there are always pressures of demand. The RS Sailing produces, as they reported to us in their tender, they produce some 3,000 boats a year over their entire brand. They gave us assurances that their current manufacturing capability is projected for the year for the aero hull within their build schemes between 400 and 600 boats without the Olympic selection. So we then asked at the trial, well, if you were selected, with your current building manufacturer, even without expansion, could you get to a higher number? And they assured us that they could double their production at their current facility. So if we believe them, and we know that they have 50 network areas, and I did study the map to see where those were, and there are some gaps in the world. I'm not going to say they're not. I think that they would be able to expand to those areas. I think Africa is underserved, and I believe South America is underserved. The U.S. has maybe 2 distributors for the entire North American continent. They're both, I believe, in the U.S. So do they need to expand their dealer network? Probably. But having supply is a very big part of delivering. I have told the evaluation panel of my experiences trying to buy parts in the U.S. It's very, very difficult. I can't tell you how many stories that I've heard in the last 2 days about people who can't stock laser brand parts. So I feel my my country is very underserved. I can't speak for everybody else, but Barry?
Disregarding the platform, and what I mean by the platform is what all the sails and the spars, etc., go onto. Was there any, and you may have answered the question just previously, and that is the supply of the other equipment. We've been told before by other classes that there would be no problems with equipment supply. And I have vivid memories of being in Miami one year where one particular class couldn't get very, very important parts to their equipment because it was not available in the US at that stage, remembering I come from Australia as well. So I just want to be assured myself, and thinking about our future sailors, that they will have access. And I'm not picking out one particular manufacturer at the moment, I'm talking about all. And I just want to be assured that we will have access, the sailors will have access to parts as and when required. It's no point in getting to an event and breaking, say, a centreboard, and then, oh, you can't get one in X, Y, and Z, and you've got to wait a week for it to get there. You know, the event's gone for that person at extreme cost. So there has to be something available whereby equipment is available for every sailor, not just for the elite few. Thank you.
I can't see into the future. I know what's been presented, and I know what I see with other equipment from the manufacturers, and I can't answer your question. Yes, I really, really, really want to be able to go down to my local boat shop and buy a replacement part. One of the things we were able to evaluate was whether there were custom parts on the boats that might not be available at every boat shop. And I can tell you there's one or two parts on almost every boat that would not necessarily be available at every single shop. But they're also not necessarily parts that would prevent you from going sailing. But every boat has its customized parts. You have to be able to go buy a rudder. You have to be able to go buy a centerboard. I can't buy those parts in the current equipment right now. I can't go to my shop and buy a new rudder or a centerboard. That is class legal.
A little off the subject, but that situation currently exists in other current Olympic classes. For instance, in NACRA 17, you can't buy equipment, and if the NACRA 17 truck isn't at all the regattas, there's no way of getting equipment. So all the competitors are forced to buy spares of everything and carry them with them. So this problem doesn't just necessarily apply to this new class.
I understand that, Murray, and you know, sometimes when a sailor or an athlete buys some spare equipment, and a couple of weeks or a couple of months down the track, and they haven't used it, and all of a sudden there's been a spec change to something too, and you know that piece of equipment then's redundant. You know, and they're left with something. I know I might be clutching at straws here, but let's get this all clear on the table now, because this is a big decision on where we're going of making a recommendation. And I'm just feeling for the future, that's all.
I think this whole process started, over the antitrust, which was competition between builders. And so, at the moment we know that, one of the boats has several builders and they've been building the boats, but the other is just one manufacturer, and we're taking their word that, you know, everything will be fine. So, I mean, we need to be, again, as Barry says, we need to be careful, like, you know, we're just believing that, you know, and trusting that we'll go, but the whole process started. I thought why we're here is about competition and that there are other manufacturers building boats. So we just need to keep that in mind, I think.
Yes, indeed, and we have to remind ourselves, of course, the reason that the reevaluation took place back in the days because the board considered that the current system in place and the current equipment had certain items that needed to be reviewed, which moved on and triggered the recommendation from the board to go ahead and select equipment among new options, considering also the access to the market. However, there is something that is being dealt by the board. The World Sailing has received proposed models from all the manufacturers and all the tenderers and has considered them and is implementing a model to align to the strategy and opening manufacturing that will be applied to any item of equipment that is selected. Therefore, it has to be clear that the role of this group is to select the best equipment option based on the proposals that were put forward with considerations to universality and to availability as part of selecting the best equipment that is suitable. But regarding compliance with FRAND, that is going to be dealt with whichever item of equipment is selected.
And our evaluation has already considered the universality items across our entire matrix. So our final score is already including that and those considerations. Do we need to go through them, or are you satisfied? You're okay?
I'm okay, but I don't think that the RS Aero complies with FRAND as yet, because there are no other builders. So we're just assuming there will be, that's all.
Just to add to Jaime's comment earlier, I think for this committee it's very dangerous to go now into a discussion on FRAND, because first of all, most of us are not lawyers, and it is far more complicated than just having one builder or not, because there is a time element, there is an availability element, and I think, as Dina pointed out, the universality and the availability, which has its impact also on price for sailors to buy equipment, is what has to be taken into account at this table. It is up to other bodies in the organization to make sure that we are legally compliant.
I think this is a very complicated subject because apart from being strictly one design, I mean, all boats are exactly the same. And whether they come from one factory or multi-factories, I think lies who has the rights for building the boats. And I think no equipment should be Olympic unless the rights lies with World Sailing. Because if the NACRA rights belonged to World Sailing and they started to do a bad job, World Sailing can ask for new builders, or new builders can ask for a license to build the boat. But right now, it's not World Sailing giving that license, it's NACRA, which is a trademark, which also belongs to somebody else, not to World Sailing. So that's the complicated part. So I don't think the problem is having one builder or not. It can be the example of the Finn class today is basically one builder, but whoever wants to build the boat can build the boat. The problem, I think, is a whole concept which is wrong. To be an Olympic class, the the right holder has to give away the rights to boat sailing and get a royalty for that, of course.
Be my last question or last little statement as such. Look, I compliment the evaluation panel on what has been written and what they've done on this whole process so far. But as I said in my earlier statements, that I'm just thinking of the future. So I'm not pointing the finger at anybody within the evaluation party or anything like that and saying, well, I don't think you've done a good job, etc. I think you've done an excellent job and you're to be congratulated. But we've got to think about what our future is in the sport, and I just like to make sure that we've got every T crossed and every I dotted to make sure that we go in the right direction, that's all.
Bill?
In the industry, you can be a licensed builder, as I was at one time, and I could sell anywhere around the world. Other builders of the same product could sell anywhere around the world. When we speak about our current equipment, that they have multiple builders, but those builders have specific areas. It's not as open and as clear as everyone would like to believe. I don't know all of the lawyer side of things. We don't know all of the inner workings. But it is not a open marketplace for those builders. We should know that and recognize that fact. So we talk about one of our people up here have a distribution network around the world that has holes in it, but it's a single builder. The other group has multiple builders, but each one of those only has an area. We need to look at everything as a whole when we make this decision.
One thing that I think is worth bringing your attention, and of course most of you know, but we have to note, and it has to be noted, that the report states that the announcement following the report, the evaluation of one of the tenders, the ILCA, regarding one of its builders, is not taken into account in the report. We're talking about the current situation. We have to note that what we have nowadays, according to the open statements and public statements, we have the situation, if we were to select ILCA, is not what we had presented in the tender, which considers laser performance as a manufacturer. Currently, we have a different model that is being proposed that would potentially allow for multiple manufacturers. It has to be noted whether if that's an advantage or a disadvantage or how the equipment committee wants to consider that. But we have to note that the laser performance being the manufacturer that was actually audited during the evaluation and reported in the numbers in the evaluation, that the license from the class to that manufacturer has been terminated. Now they're proposing a different model. And if we were to select the laser, it looks like it would have to be with that model moving forward. So we have to note that and consider that.
Yes, Marcus.
Just following up on that, just out of curiosity, because I can't find it in the report, the current, I have the current building capacities of Aero, and we know how many lasers there are around the world, and the new building capacities of PSA and PSJ would be around 1,500 or so. What is missing? How many Aeros have been built in total as an international class? I just couldn't find it online. If you have that information.
I have the page 21 of the report open there where I see notice to the building capacity, where we have that the RS Aero reports that they're building up to 1,500 boats a year, 30 boats a week, and that they can, in short term, increase that to 2,000. And regarding the lasers, we have values reporting that Performance Sailcraft Australia builds up to 30 boats per week. Japan builds up to 5 boats per week, and Laser Performance currently builds 50 boats per week. Regarding the fleet sizes, I think it's around for the RS Aero, if I'm not wrong. Do we have those exact numbers?
Yeah, it was just over 2,000.
It was close to 2,000. If I will look at the number and come back to you. Thank you.
Just a follow-up to that, in terms of manufacturing of spare equipment, we're talking about producing boats in the capacity right now. With the public split between LP and ILCA, where is the production of spare parts going to be picked up in that manufacturing process for distribution?
So that is going to be difficult because Japan bought its its appendages, for instance, from LP. I believe Australia builds its complete boat on its own. So I do not know the answer to that question. I just know that the biggest builder has been terminated, and I think there's obviously going to be some time for that to be replaced. But that's an aside. I really think we need to be looking at the technical presentation and let that be sort of the political side of the equation that's going to come forward. There's a lot of things that are unknown. If you select a new class, sure, I'm sure it won't be 100% smooth, but for the first time in a very long time, the class we are discussing is already an international class. Barry has made comments for years about the fact that the laser class rules aren't in the standard format. The aero class rules are already in the standard format. I mean, I'm trying to show that a transition is possible to anything if we feel it's the right pathway, the right direction for our sport. The report, I stand behind the evaluation report. I think we were fair and unbiased in our evaluation. We evaluated to a stated criteria that was presented, and I don't really have anything more to add. If you have questions about the report or the trials or future process, I'd like to answer those. Otherwise, if we've come to the conclusion of our debate, I'm okay with moving to a vote. Does anyone object to moving to a vote? Does anyone have any closing statements? Oh, Jaime does.
Just to answer Marcus, it's 1,850 reported at the sea trials.
I think we're ready. I don't think anybody's going to change their mind now.
So to clarify, there's 4 options on the table. You have to write down the name of the option that you choose. There are 2 ballots being handed out. You have to fill one for the man and one for the woman. The reason is that the ballots are as they are, we cannot change them. But you have to write down one option in each one of them, please.
Okay, so we can wait for the results, and then we're going to have our lunch break. I want to remind you again that the Governance Commission members will be available during the lunch break to discuss their paper and anything else that comes up. We'll take an hour for lunch. I think that worked out okay yesterday. And then we'll be back. And I'm going to stand up for a while.
Thank you. We have the results of the votes. We have the exact same results for the men and women, so that's good. We have the IRO receiving 9 votes in favor of the man and 9 votes in favor of the woman. The Ilka and Dinghy receiving 3 for the man and 3 for the woman. Melges, 0 votes men and 0 votes woman. The 0 votes men, 0 votes woman, 1 abstained on both events. The IRO is selected as a recommendation from this equipment committee as it has more than 50% of the votes.
I thank everyone for their considered debate here, and it's lunchtime. So 10 after 2, we'll see you then.